by our friend and member and former park superintendent, Randy Turner. And I thought tonight it would be nice if Randy introduced our speaker.
Well, thank you, Jean. It's certainly good to be here tonight as a dues-paying member of the round table. Not have to go outside and miss part of the meeting. Dr. Robert Selig is someone that I had heard about and read about long before I met him a couple of years ago. Back in 1999, I was on a 2-year detail in Washington, D.C., the first year in the Senate, and we had a hearing on this bill to authorize a study, a feasibility study on the Washington-Rochambeau route. And I must admit that, you know, after all my history classes, I knew the French Connection and Lafayette, and maybe buried back there was Rochambeau, but I think it got a short shrift in some of my classes as far as the significance. It was successful legislation, unlike so much of our Congress's work today, but it actually passed, and money was actually appropriated. The second part sometimes doesn't happen. So 6 years later, I ended up in Morristown National Historical Park, and was one of those people that got all the CCs, letters, memos, reports on the Washington-Rochambeau study. And we're so pleased that the legislation passed, establishing it. So thanks to our good friend Joe DeBello. Joe is, has the title of the superintendent, but his park is the National Historical Trail. And he also handles other long-distance trails here in this region. So we're so pleased that he was available, because as you know, he lives in Holland, Michigan. So for someone who lives in Michigan, he knows a lot about this state. And so Dr. Robert Selig, we're pleased to have you here this evening.
Thank you very much, Randy, for this wonderful introduction, and thank you also very much, Mrs. Florsheimer, for this very kind introduction. I could have listened easily for another 10 minutes about all the things you said about me. But all the things have to come to an end, but nevertheless, I would like to thank you again for inviting me to speak to you today. I would like to thank all of you for coming here tonight on what is really an important date in U.S. history. This is interactive. We're going to have a quiz afterwards for college credit. 12 May 1780, Crown forces liberate Charleston, South Carolina, or occupied, depending which side you're on. One of the darkest days, obviously, of the American War of Independence. And among the troops that were laying down their arms are also about 60 members of America's known ally, namely France, 60 black chasseurs volontaires de Saint-Domingue, and their fate is unknown, but their captors probably sold them into slavery in the Caribbean. Unbeknownst, of course, to these poor black soldiers, or to the Continental Army, or to the British for that matter, the forces that would dip the scales in favor of American independence were already on their way. Because on the 2nd of May 1780, a French convoy of about 3,000 vessels had sailed out of Brest for the New World, carrying about 450 officers and some 5,300 men of the Expedition Particulière, the code name of the dispatch of French forces to the New World for permanent stationing on the American mainland. These forces land in Newport, Rhode Island in July of 1780, spent the winter of 80-81 in Newport and Lebanon, joined their Continental Army units under General Washington at White Plains in July of 1781, from there, these forces march and sail to Yorktown and Gloucester in Virginia, where in cooperation with the French fleet that had come up from the Caribbean under Admiral de Grasse, they forced the surrender of Lower Cornwallis. The routes that are taken on water and on land by Continental Army forces under General Washington, as well as French forces under Rochambeau, and Continental Army forces under Lafayette, who already are in Virginia, are, or of right, ought to be the Washington-Rochambeau National Historic Trail. And if I say are or of right, ought to be, that speaks to that phase of the project that the National Park Service is in right now, namely to determine which roads or routes are part of this trail or not going to be part of this trail, or that the criteria that will be applied. Which is why I would like to spend the first couple of minutes of my presentation tonight to talk about this Washington-Rochambeau revolutionary route. The next slide, please. If we look ask the question, what is the Washington-Rochambeau revolutionary trail? As I said, it is the story of the march of Continental Army and French forces to Yorktown in June, July, August, September 1781, on water and on land and back again. Continental Army, November, December 81, French forces in July and August 1782, in and through those 9 states that exist at that time. In other words, it's the story of the march. Obviously, we all know they go to Yorktown and what happens at Yorktown. But the siege and surrender of Yorktown is of secondary importance in this project. This project, which as Randy said earlier, it was about 10 years in the making from 2000 until 2 years ago in March of 2009 when President Obama signed legislation establishing this National Historic Trail. Next slide, please. It's a trail that goes from Newport through Connecticut to New York, and then on land all the way down to Yorktown, and on water as well, and here through the Chesapeake. In other words, the term National Historic Trail or trail is a misnomer in that, with very few exceptions, namely river crossings in Philadelphia, Trenton, these troops are not together on the same roads. Why this is, I'll be talking about in a minute. And it's also a misnomer in that actually nobody marches to Yorktown, but because by the time they're in Annapolis, everybody is on board vessels except for the horses and the oxen and a couple of folks you need to guide those about 2,500 animals. Who goes to Washington, who does go to Yorktown on land is Washington and Rochambeau themselves, but they are the only ones there together with the folks who help them get dressed and brush their teeth, etc. This is what we're talking about, almost 700 miles, and pretty much the largest troop deployment of the War of Independence, because as we know, it's down at Yorktown, is the southernmost activity of forces that are usually up here in New Jersey and in New York. Next slide, please. As part of this project, I've been going through various states doing site surveys and route reconnaissances, because the first question that I usually get when I tell people what I'm doing, they say, well, so you have a trail. If I want to walk it, drive it, bike it, whatever, what is there for me to see? So you need to know what there is. And so a couple of years ago, I did a historical and architectural resource inventory of site survey, 3 volumes. They're all available on a CD through the New Jersey Historic Trust, if you're interested in doing this. And what I did was identify the routes, obviously, of American and French forces, try to show the contributions of New Jersey and her citizens, interaction between the local population and the Franco-American forces on the march through New Jersey. Not always friendly, obviously, because the French and Indian War had been over that long, and a lot of Americans think as soon as you get these French forces here, they're going to be followed by hordes of Jesuit priests with pails of holy water and what have you. And then finally, to lay the groundwork for the participation of New Jersey in this 9-state National Historic Trail that we have now and that the Park Service is working on. These are also the points that I would like to touch on in a couple minutes when I talk about the marches through New Jersey. Next slide, please. And actually, we are right there now. I don't want to go into the diplomatic background, why we have French forces over here, or talk about the reasons of French involvement, Wethersfield Conference, everything that's leading up to the decision to march to Yorktown. Suffice it to say that on the 6th of July, 1781, French and American forces unite near White Plains to prepare for the siege of New York. There can be no doubt that the siege of New York is the goal, purpose, task of the 1781 for any number of reasons. Obviously, it's the center of political power of Crown forces. It's the British Crown. It's a center of military power for Great Britain. There's a little bit of her feelings that play part in part of Washington, of course, because he had been thrown out rather ignominiously in 1776. All of this goes together, and so these forces unite outside Westchester County near White Plains. But as Washington is weighing the odds of a successful siege of New York, he's getting his doubts, particularly after what's known as the Grand Reconnaissance of 21st to the 23rd of July. And so, as he writes in his diary on the 1st of August, 1781, I could scarce see a ground upon which to continue my preparations against New York, and therefore I turned my views more seriously than I had done before to an operation in the southward. That's great. However, in order for this operation to the southward to be successful and to be more than just thinking about it, two things have to happen. What has to happen? First of all, Washington has to know where Cornwallis is, which he does not on the 1st of August when he writes this. And B, in order for the siege of New York or any other siege along the East Coast to be successful, you have to have a fleet. Does the Continental Army or the Continental Navy, right? So in other words, you need a fleet that can only be provided by France, whether you're going to lay siege to New York or anywhere else, and you have to know where Cornwallis is. In early August, none of this applies or is to Washington's situation there. For the time being, the first 2 weeks of August, the two generals, Washington and Rochambeau, have to wait for news from Admiral de Grasse, who would determine the point of attack. Because whether Washington likes it or not, he has to go where de Grasse goes, because he needs the fleet for any operation to be successful. When he learns through a letter that arrives at White Plains on the 14th of August that de Grasse is headed for the Chesapeake, Washington has to shift gears and shift destinations. Fortunately for Washington, the tactical situation in the South has changed as well, because Cornwallis has done exactly what Washington would have wanted him to do. We know that in late June 1781, Cornwallis had briefly occupied Williamsburg. On the 19th of July, he had marched to Yorktown and Gloucester and started digging in on the 2nd of August. What is important is that when Washington makes a decision to march to Yorktown on the 14th of August, the fact that Cornwallis is digging in at Yorktown is not known in Westchester County. This is before cell phones. In other words, there's a decision that's being made in the hope that Cornwallis will do something that will allow or make for a successful siege. In his diary, Washington writes on the 14th of August, "Matters having now come to a crisis and a decisive plan to be determined on, I was obliged to give up all idea of attacking New York, and instead thereof to remove the French troops and a detachment of the American army to the head of Elk to be transported to Virginia for the purpose of cooperating with the forces from the West Indies against the troops in that state." That's on the 14th of August. On the 15th of August, the day after the decision to march to Yorktown had been made, Washington writes in his diary that, "I dispatched a courier to the Marquis de Lafayette with information of this matter, requesting him to be in perfect readiness to prevent a possible retreat of Cornwallis to Carolina." And he also told him to immediately take such position as to be particularly careful to conceal the expected arrival of the Comte de Grasse, because if the enemy are not apprised of it, they will stay on board their transports in the bay, which will be the luckiest circumstance in the world. Clearly, on the 16th of August, Washington still assumes that ground forces are on board their vessels, that they haven't even landed. It's only the next day, the following day again, that he learns from a letter from Lafayette that Lord Cornwallis with the troops have proceeded up the York River and landed and are throwing up works at Little York. In other words, what has happened in these crucial days of mid-August is that, yes, Washington says we got to go wherever de Grasse is going, he's going to the Chesapeake. But what also has happened is that Cornwallis has done exactly what Washington would have wanted him to do. Because if Cornwallis had marched on to Baltimore, or gone down to North Carolina, or back to Charlottesville or Richmond, wherever, the fleet would have been useless. Lafayette would not have been in a position to keep him from marching wherever he wanted to. After all, Cornwallis has almost 8,000 men and 169 cannon. Lafayette has 7. If you look at firepower, everything falls into place, literally, because de Grasse says we go to the Chesapeake, and Cornwallis digs in exactly at the place where a fleet can be most successful. So those are the strategic developments that caused these Franco-American armies to march across New Jersey in the summer of 1781. This march to Yorktown was not pre-planned, because you couldn't pre-plan it, because you didn't know what de Grasse and Cornwallis and all the other players would do. These, in other words, are the strategic consideration which Washington has to take in, put into his plans. To disengage from British forces, from ground forces in New York, he has to spread a cover of secrecy over the movements of the Allied armies in order to hide their true destination, coordinate movements with Admiral de Barras and de Grasse in the Caribbean, which is obviously easier said than done. And at this time, coordinate movements with Lafayette, because the outcome of the campaign rests on the successful coordination of the movement of thousands of forces, which is why some historians have called this the most perfectly executed military campaign in the age of sail, because everything literally goes right that can go right for Franco-American armies and for the American cause in 1781. Now, talking about deception and secrecy, we know there's the story of the ovens built at Chatham, for example, that are built ostensibly to provide food and bread for French forces. And you know, those of you who've been to France know that bread even today plays an inordinately large sort of role in French diet than here in the United States. For example, there are letters that are written and sent off with the intention that these letters be intercepted, etc. And as Washington's Secretary Jonathan Trumbull writes, some of these devices were indeed laughable enough. They achieved their purpose of keeping Clinton in New York guessing long enough for the two armies to disengage. Though it should also be said that Clinton was more than happy to believe what he wanted to believe, because he was already busy writing his excuse for why he lost the war in America in 1781. Next slide. This being the tactical consideration, strategic considerations, now we need to go at the tactics. Phase 1, 18 to 27 August 1781. Devise ruses, address logistical needs for the march, establish a chain of observation posts from Stevens Landing to Springfield, facilitate the movements of American forces in various columns, and as well French forces down to Whippany. That's that first phase. And look at the places. Whippany, Springfield, and Chatham. And you know where these places are on a map, because this is extremely important as we go through this. Now, the first important point is logistical needs. And at that point, I'd like to take a look at how many people are we talking about. Next slide, how many people are we talking about? Size of American forces, size of French forces, size of communities, availability of campsites, condition of roads, forts, the need to cross the Delaware, funds to pay for what you need, and supplies. Let's look at the size of America. How large is the Continental Army that marches through New Jersey? That's all that Washington has. Any idea?
Yes,
Not even. Next slide, please. Not even. If you look at these fighters of the Continental Army, you get maybe 2,700. And they're not even, if you look at the New York regiments, they're not even with the main forces. Where's the Continental Army? Where's the rest? The rest needs to stay outside New York City underneath, because you still got Jeremy Clinton in there. So this is not even half of the Continental Army that is marching through New Jersey down to Yorktown. How large are French forces? Next slide. French forces, almost 5,000. Land forces. This is a somewhat earlier list of forces, but either way, the French forces, Rochambeau's forces, are at least 75% larger than the Continental Army. Once we get down to Yorktown, by the way, does that relationship change? Continental Army forces, French forces? Does it change? Are there more Continental Army forces in Yorktown or French forces? More French forces there, just on land. Just on land. And in the Continental Army, about a third of them are militia. How many Continental Navy vessels are off the coast in Virginia? How many French vessels are out there? A whole bunch of them. Literally to the tune of about 28,000 men on these various vessels. Okay, this is the number of people that we are talking about. That's not counting women, etc., of which we have a couple dozen as well. Next slide, please. There are large numbers of wagons and parting supplies for these armies that accompany the Continental Army has about 140 or so wagons, which add to the tune of 6 oxen each, adds up to how much? About 850. I know exactly where I would want to be on that column if I had to march. And that's the small group. That's the small group. The French Army, Rochambeau has at least twice that many wagons and cattle and animals there. Easily, if you put them all together, it would be over 3,000. A column, even certainly on the French side, that stretches between 3 and 4 miles down the road, and that's always going to be half of the army because it marches in two sections. You can imagine what these roads look like, because they're not built for this kind of traffic. They're built for the occasional farmer going to a market, and suddenly you've got thousands of animals and thousands of men using those roads in the process. Officers and servants, I have yet to find the first French officer who only has one servant. How many officers did I say were there with Rochambeau? They come. But 450 times 2 is 900. That's a whole infantry regiment in servants, because obviously French officers weren't allowed to draw these men from the ranks. They all had, I have yet to find the first officer who doesn't have at least 3 horses, which are not on the official establishment. But if you take, again, 400 officers to 3 horses, you're another 1,200 horses that are just the private means of transportation for these men. So if I say 3,000, 3,500 animals, that's probably on the conservative side, together with thousands of men who are marching through New Jersey. Here, next slide. This is just one example I wanted to show you from Wadsworth Papers. This wagon train is replenished all as we go along the road, and here is a group of wagoners from New Jersey who take service in the French Army. Mr. Gardner here. Here's his signature. He joins the French wagon train in Philadelphia, but he is from Chatham, for example. As these forces make their way like a horde of locusts almost across the countryside, there are people whose terms expire who said, I'm not going to Maryland because they got fever and what have you down there. There's a constant turnover in personnel. The logistics of this march are difficult to describe. Next slide. Because if we look at the towns that they go through, Allied forces are a total of 8,000 officers, enlisted men, serving personnel. Philadelphia has maybe 28,000 men. It's the only city along the road that can probably feed these people and these animals. You go down to New Jersey, right? New Brunswick, Perth amboy, and Trenton are the only incorporated cities. In 1781, Trenton has more or less 100 houses, 500 inhabitants. Over the span of 5 days, 8,000 people marched through there. It's great stories to say that the farmers opened their cider cellars and rolled out their barrels. They wouldn't have lasted very long. And the women baked cakes and apple pies for all these soldiers. They'd better start about 6 months early to get there. It just doesn't work. Whippany, 30 houses, 200 inhabitants. Supplies for these armies as they go through New Jersey or any other state have to come from miles around. That is easier said than done, of course, because an ox cart with a pair of oxen does what? 15 miles a day if you're lucky. Because you can make a horse gallop, but not an ox, right? They will go their speed. So, to supply these many people, you have to get supplies from 40, 50, 60 miles away. That's a 4-day journey in this. And you have to get back again, of course, as well. This march through New Jersey and through all the other states would only have been successful if whole neighborhoods, whole counties from miles around contribute to this. And this is also one of the more positive sides of this National Historic Trails project, to show, based on thousands of documents in Wadsworth papers and IOUs, in New Jersey it's all IOUs, nothing has changed, that literally about 10,000 of them for the 1781 campaign at Rutgers in the special collections, IOU 2001. Based on these documents, you can show from how far people contributed to the success of this campaign. The American War of Independence did not just happen in Boston, Valley Forge, and Yorktown. It happened in your neighborhood in there. And this trail is a wonderful opportunity to show this if you could integrate this into school curricula, etc. Very small communities. And until we get down to Yorktown. Because what is the largest town in the United States in 1781? Yorktown, Virginia. 9,000 Continental Army forces, 9,000 French forces, almost 8,000 surrendered. That gives how much? 26,000 right there, not counting reservists. Not counting 28,000 or so French sailors on board of these vessels. That also explains why the Continental Army doesn't tarry down there. There's no way to feed all these people. Can you imagine a public safety or public health official showing up at Yorktown in 1781? You would have shut down that camp before you could ask why. You know, then the porta potties. And what's that? Just imagine. I mean, in Baltimore, when they get to Baltimore, the Continental Army alone slaughters 800 head of cattle in 2 days and dump everything in big pits. If you do this today, you got to pit up people all over you. Next slide, please. Next slide. Route reconnaissances. This is the only route reconnaissance report that I could find, and we don't need to read all of it, but it's your neighborhood. The yellow house here, we're going to the two bridges at the forks, Ogden's Ironworks. That's the only one that I could find, because this is dated Kingsbury the 23rd of August, by the 25th of August, these roads are being used, and thereafter they kind of gave up on route reconnaissances. It simply wasn't feasible to do. You have to realize, the decision to march is made on the 14th of August. By the 18th of August, the armies are gone. Try to move the U.S. Army in 4 days. It's just, you can't do it. They literally turned around, decision is made, tomorrow get ready, day after tomorrow, you're on the road. Literally. With all the advantages and disadvantages, of course, as far as preparation is concerned. And the speed, because your quartermasters, etc., they're out there trying to collect supplies, maybe half a day's head start, 2 at most, and then we go from there. Next slide. This is an overview of the various routes that I want to talk about briefly, and you can see how forces enter New Jersey on different angles, how they spread out here. Eventually they get down here. It's a network, a whole network of routes. A network of routes, however, which is carefully coordinated. Nevertheless, as a whole, I can show you next slide. On the 19th of August, right, the combined New Jersey Regiment, 330 officers, and the Canadian Regiment, 270, Icelandic much practice. Right here, 330 and 270 make about 600, right? So Henry Clinton has 11,000. And then you got light infantry at New Hampstead, another 400 or so. Next slide, please. Here is the old church in Brahmas and the market, and you know these sites. Most likely, I just want to show you a map and then always say a couple of pictures to go with it. Next slide. The next day, 20th of August, and you see how we get the first columns making their way right here, and it's not that far, obviously, over to New York City. They leave observation posts, a couple of men on horseback, like a screen along the road. On the 19th, on the 20th, next slide, please. Here's a part of this old roadbed, actually the Ramapo Reformed Church. If you look at the Erskine maps, they match exactly, which is where this road is today. Next slide. On the 21st, this first group is down here in Springfield. The Continental Army is still up at Stony Point crossing, and a detachment on the Major Bauman, about 150, is leaving from New Windsor. But of the first part of this plan, namely a screen of observation posts to help deceive and keep Clinton in the dark, is up within a very short time period. Next slide. Hubert's Gap, which is where most 18th Regiment camps, they camp on either side of this intersection here. But you can see here, this is how close we really are here. With how many people? Not even 500, right? It's spread out. Next slide. 22nd. We're still crossing up here and trying to come into New Jersey. Next slide. Springfield is one of the sites on this church on this National Historic Trail that we're working on. Next slide. 23rd of August. You see, for days there is nothing but a couple hundred Continental Army troops, while the rest of the Continental Army is moving. How hard would it have been for Clinton to send a couple thousand men back to Springfield? Not that it had happened before, right? And to find out what's going on here. Why do we have Continental Army forces marching down here? Why are the French forces, Continental Army forces, moving? If you want to attack New York City, you don't do it from Chatham, surely. Even whether there are others there or not, that seems somewhat circuitous to me. Next slide. Okay, here's an 18th century road section in Bergen County, just in northern Bergen County. In here, if you look long and hard enough, you'll find dozens of these 18th century road sections still in your area here to the north. The closer you get down to one, the more these are in place by Dunkin' Donuts. Next slide. Okay. Now suddenly on the 24th, we get Bauman coming in through the Continental Road, what's known as the Continental Road that comes from Newburgh, and that's the 24th. But French and Continental Army forces are still crossing the Stony Point. Next slide, please. This Continental Road goes right in front of Ringwood Manor. Here's the tomb of Robert Erskine, and this is actually part of the Continental Road built in 1779 on instructions of Washington, because he wanted a shorter road connection between Morristown and Newburgh, and he goes today right to Tuxedo Reserve and goes up to Newburgh. Talking about Tuxedo Reserve, next slide. Here you see on an 18th century map is Tuxedo Lake. Here and here is the road as he goes up to Newburgh. Here's Ringwood, Ironburg, here's Suffolk over here. Right? Next slide. If those of you who know Tuxedo Reserve, Reserve and Lake. We were, what it was called in there, Miha Lake. Here's the gate to Tuxedo Reserve, and the 18th century road went right through where the lake is today, because that lake wasn't there. But 1954, for example, when the lake was drained, you could see these are the logs of the Corduroy Road built in 1779. It's on the water today, but it's obviously still there, and there's still some sections in Tuxedo Reserve as well of that road built in 1779. I know this is somewhat outside our area here, but it was quite common to build roads like that, just with logs in the more muddy areas. Next slide. Now we're getting to the 25th of August, and here is Continental Army forces entering New Jersey in here's Ramapo College, up on Route 202, right, Route 2 up there, right? But what you see here immediately is that as soon as they are underneath what's today the railroad crossing up there, these two columns split. One column on the Lincoln goes here, more or less Route 17. In here, and the other goes straight Road 202. Next slide. Along the road, I just want to show you some of the sites. The Van Horn house up in Mahwah, the French campsite, American campsite, as well the tennis grounds up there. And the president's house is further down the road here of Ramapo College. Down here, there's a historic marker, actually to commemorate that site. Next slide. Here's an example of supplies, an account of forage bought and received by John Suffern. Suffern is obviously named for use of the French Army who entered 13 September. And you see a lot of well-known Blackburn County residents in there. As these armies make their way through New Jersey, if there's a French quartermaster approaching a house, would the locals have run away or opened their doors? Would have opened their doors. And why? Because the French had cash. So, if a Continental Army officer comes, he probably has what? Or simply a requesting a request or an impress order or something like that. French forces, as a rule, are welcome, not because they're French, but because they have money. There are estimates by historians that the presence of French forces in 1780 and 81 doubles the amount of bullion in circulation in these colonies. French écus, 6 livre pieces, are legal tender in the state of New York until 1857. So many of them are there. You can buy one on eBay, but they got more expensive. The price of silver is going up. It doesn't really matter whether it's a French piece of silver or a British crown or Spanish, because it's silver. Who cares of who's on there? It's valuable. We know, in the case of French forces, who contributed, because Jeremiah Wadsworth of Connecticut is the sole agent for the French army marching through all the way to Yorktown and back. And since he wants to get reimbursed from the French, together with his commission, which makes him the richest man in Connecticut after the war, he saves his receipts. In the case of the Continental Army, we know where they were because of all the IOUs, of which we have these pay stubs, as I said, they're all brokers, and it's a whole syrup box for anything imaginable. So reconstructing who is where, when, who contributed what, to whom, is possible. And getting, because the names of thousands of people who are on this road are out there. Next slide. We're getting closer into New Jersey, and now you see how Lincoln and his column is on its way to Springfield eventually. But look how many of them there are. Washington is near two bridges, and you know where this is. Right here, about 800, and Lincoln is down here with about 330, 270, and a couple other. Here's Lincoln with another 800. French forces, at least 4,300. However, as we look at this, here we have the first screen. Here comes the second column of Continental Army forces. Here comes the third column of Continental Army forces. And right on their heels come French forces with a little bit delay. Next slide, please. They camp in Compton Plains, rather, along here. And next slide. If this is the main street here we got the main street again. Here's the meeting house. You just saw the marker for the church. It's right here, and here's where the campsite was on this French campsite map. The road from Suffern, right, is right here. With a map like this, you go out there, you can pretty much pinpoint down exactly where they were, because we know from French ordinances how much space between tents, how many tents they had to be, etc., etc. Next slide, please. And now, 27 August, and now I think it becomes very clear. One screen, two screen, three screens, and here are the French forces right behind them. The largest concentration of forces with the heaviest equipment takes the shortest road, but it's also protected by two columns of Continental Army forces, so that Sir Henry Clinton here in New York City hopefully will not think that he is going to be the target of the attack. Next slide. Here is Continental Army campsite Chatham, in Chatham along Main Street, and there's actually a historic marker there for this. Next slide, please. Here is the Doremos house, and I don't know if you all know where this is, or whether they have been in there. This is a house in the 18th century that never had electricity installed, that never had indoor plumbing installed. It's literally the way it was, the way it was built. I don't know what the status of this is right now, but it sure deserves preservation, because there are not that many of these houses.
Just been restored.
Is it being restored?
The Historical Preservation Trust Fund has been funding restoration of that.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. Next slide. And now on 28 August 1781, which is why this was the first phase that I was saying. The Continental Armies encamped at Chatham, Springfield, French forces at Whippany. This is the last potential area of deployment against forces in New York City, because if you make a hard left, you can still go after into New York City. Once you leave from here, right, you are irrevocably committed to campaigning in Virginia, with the hope, of course, that when you get there, Cornwallis is still there, right? Because if Cornwallis says, you know, I don't want to stay here, I march back to North Carolina, there's no way that Lafayette can prevent him from doing so. If there's a British fleet that sails into the Chesapeake Bay and lands at Yorktown, and Cornwallis gets on board vessels, there is no way Lafayette can keep him from doing this. Or if the Russ has a problem, if there's a hurricane or something in the Caribbean as he comes up, or if he runs into Rodney or something and never shows up in the Chesapeake, then even if you get down there, if there's no French fleet to complete the circle, then as we know was planned and resulted in the Battle of the Capes on the 5th of September, again, there's no way that that this campaign is successful. In other words, a lot of this here is happening on good faith and in the hope that everything is going to work out, because surely we've got to have some luck at some point in this war, which is exactly what happened. Yeah, would you mind through with the questions and I'm done? Yeah.
So just a quick question, how long would it take a courier to get from Yorktown to New Jersey?
If you ride 60 miles on a day, you're doing good. And from New Jersey, even from Trenton to Yorktown is how far still?
12 days.
Pardon?
12 days.
If you can do it in 6 days, you can do it in 6 days. There are people who ride 80 miles a day. I wouldn't want to do it. But still, to and fro is going to take you 6-7 days. No matter how fast you are, right? Okay, this is the crucial moment in the campaign. And French officers as well as Continental Army officers acknowledge that it is during these first couple days up to 28 August that Clinton really has a chance of wrecking this whole campaign. Because if he sends a couple thousand over that attack, say Lincoln here, clearly the rest of the Continental Army has to come to his assistance. So French forces are going to stop. And this whole plan is thrown into disarray because we all know that Washington-Rochambeau are also under time pressure because the Gras says, I am leaving on the 15th of October, no matter what. So even a 1 week, 10-day delay here wrecks the whole campaign. These, I think, are the 10 most crucial days of this Yorktown campaign of 1781. Because once Washington is in Trenton, once French Army forces are in Philadelphia, they are out of reach of Clinton. But up to now, this is when Washington and when Clinton can do something. And you see how I think cleverly this is all devised here with different screens, with different troop strength, and French forces are way in the back as short as possible run. Okay, next slide. Now comes phase 2. If deception had been the key to the success of phase 1, speed is the key to success in phase 2, because as they move south, they become increasingly safe for British force in New York City. Is 1 week enough? Well, we know it turns out that 1 week is enough. Next slide, please. As we now move Chatham, you see how we are moving here to New Brunswick, again in 3 columns that will, next slide, eventually a campsite here at Liberty Corner, the English Farm, which also has been reserved now. Fortunately, still a working farm. Yeah, we had a reenactment there in 2006. Next slide, please. You see where it is. William's Tavern is the creek, here's the road. And right here on the hillside is where the encampment was in 1781. Up here, there's a Shell station up there. There used to be a gas station up there right at this corner. I'm not telling you any secrets. These maps are all online. If you go to the Library of Congress website and bring out your metal detector, you're going to find all kinds of things right there. Next slide. Next slide. Here you see, here we see how these forces are finally all coming closer together here as we're getting up to Princeton and Trenton. Behind Continental Army and French forces, we have the Red Corps 2nd New York Regiment bringing some boats from Happiness Falls that will be needed for the Yorktown campaign. They are slower, they come way behind. In other words, this is about 10 days that you get troop movements here. And they are the only forces that I know that came somewhere in the vicinity of Morristown, because Samuel Talmadge writes that on the 30th of August, struck camp at daybreak, proceeded on to Morristown. They are halted, and from thence to the Half Moon Tavern and encamped. Other sources say that this Half Moon Tavern is about 3 miles south of Morristown. Do you have any idea what that is? I could never find it. This is a serious question now. Just for extra credit. There's also a young infantryman, a 12-year-old who's marching there, whose reminiscences were published in the 1850s. He was living out of Cincinnati at the time as well. And he says about 3 miles south of Morristown, but I could never find or locate a tavern called the Half Moon Tavern down there. Maybe that's, if anybody knows, I would love to hear that. But that's the only time we have any kind of food encampment actually here in the vicinity of Morristown. Next slide, please. I just want to show you some of these French roadside road maps here. Here again we have Morristown here, the church, and you go along with the other houses. Here we have Whippany. Whippany here. Here's the Ferme de Monsieur Lot. And this is the Mr. Lot's farm. You know what this is? Right off the interstate, there is this kind of a fenced-in area that Beaver House Lot Farm. There's an archaeological site. That's right up here. What? Yeah.
Beverwick in 46.
Yeah, this is right here where it's indicated. And it's right along the interstate now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's up there. These are French roadside maps. I just want to show you a couple here. Whippany, obviously you know where this intersection is. In here, these are, unfortunately, we have no equivalent on the American side for this. Because if Washington would have told the New Jersey regiment how to get from Whippany to Compton, they would have started laughing. Because, or just like the other forces, they have been in New Jersey so often, they don't need maps to get there. But the French need maps, and then they also make maps when they get back to France later in the 1780s, which is why we have these wonderful road descriptions, roadside maps, etc., which are either in the Library of Congress or were published elsewhere. Next slide, please. Eventually, they get down to Princeton and camp along Stockton Street. Next slide. Then we eventually get down to Trenton and cross from Trenton into Pennsylvania. So you see, we spread out, then we all get together because now speed is of the essence. Plus, there's only so many places where you can actually cross these rivers. It's also at Trenton that the first Continental forces already go on board vessels and sail down to Philadelphia and keep sailing until they land where? In Christiana, in Delaware. That's mostly artillery, and this is where the first water trail begins in Trenton already, down to Christiana, because from Christiana you only have a very short portage down to Winterville. You know, just past Cooch's Bridge, and then that's where the next day they go back on water again, and eventually end up all down in Yorktown on the 26th of September, 1781. And the siege of Yorktown begins when? On the 28th of September. This is how much time they have to spare. Does anybody know where Washington is? Where Washington is when he hears the news of the Battle of the Capes on the 5th of September? Washington is south of Quantico, Marine Corps base. He is about 2 days at most away from Yorktown. That's when he hears in Dumfries that there's this naval battle. You betcha he was nervous, because as a rule the French don't do too very well against the Royal Navy. Fortunately, even that time it worked out as one of the few. But I'm just saying this to show you how much depends on good fortune and on good faith. We're going to go there, that's just how it works out. I'm not now trying to downplay Washington's leadership or anything like that, but this Yorktown campaign is based a lot on things working out as they eventually do. And with that, I would like to end, because we're getting out of New Jersey here. We could do the whole thing for the return march, but we'll do this some other time. Thank you very much.
assuming that the British had dominance of the seas so that he could stay in Yorktown and be relieved there by the British fleet. So Washington figured that out and said, well, he's planning to stay there because he assumes he can be relieved at any point.
The answer to this, it goes back a couple of years earlier. When was the first Washington-Cornwallis encounter?
That's right.
Princeton. And Cornwallis had been arrogant and said, I got the fox back, right? But the next morning, where was the fox? It was up at Princeton here. So I think Cornwallis knew who he was dealing with, not to be too overly confident. He had hope that he would be rescued by Clinton. On the other hand, these two people didn't talk to each other, and even in their writings, there was barely disguised hostility in there.
Isn't that why Cornwallis stayed in Yorktown near the water near the bay?
Because he thought he would be rescued. Yes, yes. Yeah, not because Clinton told him so. And then when Cornwallis is captured, because he's not rescued, you can always say, you know, look, Clinton told me to do this. And we all know that Clinton gets the blame. Cornwallis gets almost a hero's welcome when he gets back to London. And a couple of years later, Cornwallis is where? It's in India. And in India, the majority of his forces are from where? They're from Hanover. They're also mercenaries. They don't just come over here. You have them also over in India until 1789, 1790, when they finally come back from India. Next question, yes, sir.
Yeah, Dick Seabury had pointed out that below the Knoll Country Club, there's a rock by the Whippany River. Is that where they crossed over and then walked up, came up, where you call Beverwick Road?
I can't correct. I was too long in the army. It's a great excuse.
On the border between Montville and Parsippany,
yeah,
there's a crossing at the Whippany River. There's a rock there. Indicates, looks like they came up, for lack of a better word, by Knoll Road, well, you know the area, by Knoll Road, and they made a turn on Beverwick Road. Would that have been the area? Dick Seabury, he knows where the rock is.
Yeah, there's a bronze plaque there.
Mm-hmm.
And when they had the reenactment a couple of years ago, he did for a right on the crossing.
Yeah, these reenactors followed the route of the French forces fairly exactly, because I have worked with them in this process, and that is, yeah, this is the route. If you're walking, you can stay fairly closely to where the original roads actually were. If you're driving, you can't, because sometimes it's one-way streets in the wrong direction. So. Yes, sir.
What was Clinton doing? Didn't he find out that the army had left? After all, there were plenty of British spies in Philadelphia. The army's going through there, they've got to know something. So.
If you look through the diaries and journals and letters of British officers or Hessians, Baumeister's journal, etc., everybody, even before they got up to Springfield and Chatham, everybody says they're going to York and they go to Virginia. And Robertson in his journal also says, he talked to Clinton, says we should do something, and Clinton totally ignores it. It's difficult to understand. It is difficult to understand how he would intentionally not see what everybody else sees, right? That you know, it becomes, you know, look, even Rochambeau's forces, if they wanted to go after New York City, surely they would have been a little closer to the coast. Clinton totally ignores it, and I'm not sure how to explain it other than he had already given up. That's the only explanation I have. Because everybody around him says, you know, heaven help Cornwallis, because we're not. I mean, literally, this is what Baumeister writes in his journal in early August 1781. But as I said, Clinton is already working on this book that comes out, and his apology, or his as for why the war ended this way, and why it's all Cornwallis's and Saint-Germain's fault, and not his. It just didn't work. Doesn't matter.
Dr. Selig, is there plans to put more markings or signs on the National Trail trail so that he can find these places that you're referring to?
I can only speak for myself because I'm not a national park employee. I'm just hired help. But I know that Jody Bell, the superintendent, is working on a management plan, or working toward a management plan. Part of that, obviously, is to determine which roads or routes will be part of this trail network, because it's a whole network. Does Washington-Rochambeau have to be on there? Do they have to have been more than 200 people? Do we pick the one that's most picturesque? Is the one that goes through Newark? Because there are all kinds of things to see there too. How this is going to be decided, I really don't know. It has a lot to do with money, obviously, because the larger this road network is. You get down to Virginia, I just worked out in Virginia, if you wanted to trace Continental Army forces and French forces in 1781, you get a trails system that's larger than the Civil War trails, because it goes all the way up to Appleton, to the Old Mountain Victory Trail, etc. So it will be it's a question of money, of deciding what is part of it, and local cooperation. I mean, if you think, everybody thinks that the Park Service is going to fund thousands of markers, this along the road, I don't think that's going to happen unless you get a huge budget. Joe gets a huge budget for that. And even then, this project is meant to be as a cooperative project with local stakeholders such as DAR, SAR, roundtables, tourism offices, federal park units, whatever in there. This is what Joe is working on. How this is going to work out eventually, I don't know. Right now, I know we're working on one of these flyers, the standard National Park Service flyers, with the black top in there, so that people you have an idea where it is. And initially, I think that's just going to be National Park Service units on there identified. And then you'll go from there over the next couple of years. This is one of the reasons why we have state organizations of this National Historic Trail in all the different states, as well as a national organization. We just had our meeting in Princeton 3 weeks ago. April 16 at the National Club. Selig always does everything first class in there. So that the Park Service has some people to work with, groups to work with, etc. So eventually, yes, there will be markers, etc. But Park Service doesn't even have a standard trail logo yet. The one with the rounded triangle shape. They're working on this. Partly because they didn't get a budget until 3 weeks ago. And if you don't have a budget, you don't have authority to spend money. And if you would run your company like the way Congress runs the federal government, you'd be broke. But let's not get political here.
We have one more question?
That's one more question. Yes, sir.
I was going to say that it seems like the geography of New Jersey really lent itself to tree movement here. You had those river valleys, the Wanacue, the Ramapo, the Hackensack river valleys. And some protection too. The
Watcher Mountains.
And the Mountains that maybe would have in some ways dissuaded Clinton from coming out to engage. But the troops could move down those valleys with maybe they could still be detected, but maybe less so than those valleys from there. They have to travel out in the open, so to speak.
Yeah, even geography helps. As you go through New Jersey. Yes. Yes, sir. Okay, now all
for creating a wonderful website for us. Thank you so much. And it looks, it's not on?
Switch.
looks like I'm going to get stuck here introducing the next feature of our program, which happens to be you-know-who. With the trivia man. Before I say goodnight to everybody, safe home. Wonderful seeing you all. Have a great time in our wonderful weather. Enjoy it. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. Here for the trivia.
She calls me at home. Okay, may I admonish you all, please, to return your name tags to the envelope in the back, the shoe bag that we use for. Okay, let's see how good you are. Incidentally, one of the questions I have here is right on point with what our speaker tonight told you. First question, although the Vermont colony fought with the other colonies during the Revolution, it was not one of the 13 original colonies. That's not generally known. Vermont. When did it become the 14th state? And what was it known as before it became a state? 1791 is correct. Okay. It was called the Republic of Vermont. Okay. After Vermont joined the Union, which state was next and when? Kentucky? 1792. You got that a Snickers bar. Okay. Huh, okay. The date, May 4th, 1776, is significant to which of the original 13 colonies? They did something on this date that took a lot of guts.
New Jersey.
No? No? Rhode Island declared itself independent of Great Britain. That took a lot of guts at that time. I think they were the first. On this date, let's see. How long did it take for the news, here we go, of the Yorktown victory to reach the Congress in Philadelphia? Anybody? 5 days. 5 days to get it. Let's see, I'll read it. A dispatch rider brought the unofficial news at 2 a.m. on October the 22nd, 1781. 2 days later, Washington's official report was delivered to the Congress by his aide, Lieutenant Colonel Tench Tillman, who personally told the exciting news to the Congress, and they said to great acclaim. Incidentally, somebody said that they told the Congress to defray Colonel Tillman's expenses, and they didn't have any money. Did he? Our speaker says that he got the money in 1784, so it took him a long time to pay their debts. Without interest. Now here's an interesting one. When did the news of Cornwallis's defeat reach England? 1 month and 3 days later. 33 days. On November 25th, the word reached King George, who took the occasion to reassert his resolve to continue the war. His advisors later persuaded him not to do that. When did Great Britain declare an official end to hostilities?
83.
Yeah. No, there was just a declaration, I think, by Parliament that the hostilities ended on February 4th, 1783. This is what my source tells me, anyway. What is the date and place which is considered the first real American military victory of the Revolutionary War? Treasure. What was the date? December 26th. Yeah. Remember, it was the day after Christmas. Okay. Washington considered himself an old man when he died on December 14th, 1799. How old was George Washington when he died?
69.
67.
Yeah, sure.
67. You can't trust anybody anymore. Incidentally, that was 28 years past the life expectancy age of 39 years for the time. Okay. What is before the Congress? Lexington. Okay, that was the initial contact. April 19th, 1775 at Lexington, Mass. Okay, just got a couple more. You're doing pretty well. Name the date of Evacuation Day in New York City. Anybody know?
November 25th, 1783.
Very good. Very good. Good one, look you way. Okay. 2 years and 8 days after Yorktown. On what date was the Treaty of Paris signed, recognizing America's independence? Anybody know? These are significant dates. You all should know these. Nobody? September 3rd, 1783. Treaty of Paris signed. How long?
Where was Congress when it was ratified?
Annapolis, Maryland. Okay, one last question. How long did the Revolutionary War